Hello viewers, today we will be talking about population distribution in the developing world, the root cause of looming energy problem and the key to easing the environmental, economic and religious tensions while improving public health is to address the unending and unequal growth of human population. And the one proven way to reduce fertility rates is to empower young women by educating them. Population distribution has an important relation with land use, land cover and global climatic change. It also affects the demand for other kinds of natural resources because for any given combination of technology, energy use patterns and social organizations, population can have important multiplying effects in relation to the global change. Therefore, understanding the concept of population distribution is very important. Population distribution can be defined as the proportional distribution of population over the available land area. The reflector of population distribution is mostly the population density, which is the number of people per square kilometer. However, it must be remembered that this definition points towards the arithmetic population density, which is the average number that we get by dividing the region's area by the total number of people in that given region. However, this kind of definition will not be very useful and only helps in comparing the densities of two regions. So, a better way to define population density is to use the concept of physiological population density. In this case, instead of using the total area of the region, the area of only agriculturally cultivable land is used. So, the physiological population density is defined as the number of people per unit of agriculturally productive land. This concept is more meaningful and not misleading since the concept of arithmetic density may not be able to account for emptiness of certain places across the world. Despite this fact also, the concept of arithmetic density is widely used. There are numerous ways to study the population distribution, but the most widely used among these are the dot distribution maps and the thematic mapping techniques such as the choropleth method. The dot distribution method shows how the numbers of people differ from one region to the other. These maps make use of dots to depict the population. For example, one dot represents 100 people. The choropleth method is a kind of thematic mapping strategy which actually makes use of different grades of color to depict the extent of changes in population in a region. This technique helps in depicting the population density as it expresses the relation between numbers and areas. The table 1 shows the density of population across different regions of the world. It can be clearly seen that there is quite a lot of disparity in this. For the world as a whole, the density of population is 52. For the more developed regions, it is 24, but for the less developed regions, it is high at 71. The least developed nations have a population density of 42 per square kilometer. Asia has a very high density of 136, while Australia has a pretty low density of 3. To study the population distribution, the world is divided into several regions that are as follows. Africa divided into Eastern, Middle, Northern, Western and Southern Africa. Asia divided into Eastern, South Central Asia, Central Asia, Southeastern Asia, Western Asia and Southern Asia. Europe again divided into Eastern, Western, Northern and Southern regions. Latin America and Caribbean divided into Caribbean, Central America and South America. Northern America, Oceania divided into Australia, New Zealand, Melanesia, Micronesia and Polynesia. Since population distribution amongst the developing nations is to be understood, so these areas are further divided into developed and developing. The more developed regions include Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand and Japan. The less developed regions include Africa, Asia except Japan, Latin America and Caribbean, plus Melanesia, Micronesia and Polynesia. Now we come up to the determinants of population distribution. The population distribution keeps changing across regions of the world, and it is not changing in the same manner across the world's different regions. The question is that why this phenomena is occurring? Why is it that some pockets are densely populated and some others are sparsely populated? For this, it is important that we look into the determinants of population distribution. Natural resources. The regions having rich wealth of natural resources like coal, water, minerals and forest wealth favor the growth of population and its concentration. These resources help in overall development and help in promotion of trade, commerce and industry. This will further attract greater number of people in that area. This is the reason that Northwest Europe has great population. Climatic factors. Climate also influences the growth of population. Moderate climate leads to growth of population because it is pleasant and refreshing. In these regions, mostly more number of people are attracted. On the other hand, people would not like to live in too hot and too cold climates. This is the reason why deserts are sparsely populated because of extreme climates. Quality of soil. Rich and fertile soils always help in the growth and development of agriculture activities with substantially high yield per hectare. This is so because fertile lands produce a variety of crops to support dense population. Means of transport and communication. Highly developed means of air, surface and water transport add to density of population in a particular region because there the people can manage and carry on agriculture, commercial as well as industrial activities very safely and swiftly. Migration of population. Another very important factor affecting population distribution is the rates at which population is moving from one region to the other. Mostly regions that are developed can attract population and there may be influx in that region. This will vary the distribution in both areas from which population is leaving and to which it is entering. Cultural factors. Modes of life of people also affect the population distribution. The density of population is low in equatorial forests and deserts because to support families, the nomadic tribes that live in these regions are often engaged in food gathering. It may also be that the place holds some kind of religious significance, so that more people want to reside in such areas. Land terrain. The flatter areas will tend to have more population because it is easier for people or inhabitants to use this land to grow crops and support their families. Hilly areas on the other hand will not be much preferred since they will not help in starting industries or sowing crops. Urbanization. The urbanized areas have all the push factors that will attract more population. The more urbanized places will not only provide better education, health and other services, but also an overall better standard of living. Industrialization. The areas that are industrialized will have spillover effects of developing the regions around them, which naturally will attract more population. This diagram illustrates the different factors that play an important role in determining where people would want to live, which in turn influences the density and distribution. The relief of the area, its climate and availability of resources play an important role in determining this. World population distribution. The rates at which population is increasing are well known by now. World population is increasing at alarming rates, and a characteristic feature that has been noted is diversion of population from developed to the developing regions of the world. In recent times, most of the world's population has been residing in developing regions like Asia and relatively few in developed regions such as North America. The projections estimate that more than 50% of these will be residing in the least developed regions. In 2005, of the 82 million people living increasingly every year, 54% were living in Asia and 33% in Africa, and it is projected that by 2050, 80% of the addition to world population will be in Africa. Also, most of the world population growth estimated to take place between 2014 and 2050 will be taking place in small number of countries. 9 countries are expected to account for more than 50% of the world's projected increase in population. They are United Republic of Tanzania, USA and Uganda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, India, Indonesia, Nigeria, Pakistan. With these kinds of projections, it becomes imperative to look back into the history as to how population distribution across the globe has been changing. Asia's population accounted for 2/3 of the world's total population before 1800. South Asia's share of world population will rise from 32% in 1980 to 34% by 2025, despite the fact that its growth rate will have reduced from 2.3% in 1980 to 1.5% by 2000 to 2005 and 0.9 by 2020 to 2025. For East Asia, the share is predicted to reduce from 26% in 1980 to 21% by 2025. While the population of Africa that grew from 479 million in 1980 to 872 million by 2000 will rise to 1,617 million in 2025. In this scenario, it will account for 20% of the world population. The table 2 shows distribution of world population across 2 years in 1980 and 2013. Also, the projections for same are shown as per different variants. For the more developed regions, the proportion of population has decreased between 2 years, but for the less developed regions, the distribution percentage has increased during the same time. The projection for percentage distribution in 2050 for different variants is more or less the same as one observed in 2013 for all major regions. This table shows distribution of world population by broad age groups in 2013 and the projected distribution in 2050 as per the medium variant. For the world, 17% of population was in the age group of 15 to 24 years, while 45% was between 25 to 59 years. 12% of world population belonged to 60 more years category in 2013. For the more developed countries, the percentage was 12, 48 and 22 respectively, while for the less developed countries, the percentage was 14, 44 and 19 respectively, which was very much similar to the world pattern. Next, we come to the population distribution in the developing world. During past 40 years, two trends have powerfully influenced the distribution of humans around the globe. First, the continued high fertility rates in many developing regions, and secondly, coupled with low fertility rates in many developed regions. These two changes have resulted in ever increasing shares of global population residing in the less developed regions. According to UN estimates, 80% of world population in 1999 lived in developing nations. Also, it should be noted that Earth's population is increasingly concentrated in urban areas. Changes in the population distribution are mainly due to the following factors. Firstly, variations in natural increase that shift the relative proportions of population across locales. Secondly, migration, which is movement of people from one area to the other. And urbanization, which is movement of people to the urban areas. In 2008, share of urban population for first time exceeded share of population living in rural areas at the global level and even in less developed regions, where majority is still living in rural areas. The decade 2000 to 2010 was the first time in the world where less developed regions exhibited growth of urban population faster than that of rural population. Natural increase is simply the difference between birth rate and death rate and will obviously lead to changes in the population distribution, and so does the process of immigration and emigration along with urbanization. This phenomenon of migration is increasing in the size, scope and complexity over past 20 years. In 2013, number of international migrants worldwide reached 232 million, up from 154 million in 1990. Although this represents an increase of 78 million people, the share of international migrants in world population increased only slightly from 2.9% in 1990 to 3.2% in 2013. In 2005, less developed countries had vast majority of population, around 81.3%, and more developed nations have estimated population of 1.2 billion or 18.7%. Since more and more residents are coming to reside in less developed regions, so it is predicted that population residing in these areas would be very high in 2050, up from 67.7% in 1950. As per UN projections, share of Asian world population would remain fairly stable over time, rising and falling slightly in the neighborhood of 55 to 60% between 1950 and 2050. Africa's share of world population has been increasing from 8.9% in 1950 to 14% in 2005, and it is projected to reach 21.3% in 2050. The least developed countries accounted for a small portion of the world population in 2005, which was 11.7%. Jointly, India and China accounted for more than 37% of the population in 2005. Further, 9 countries accounted for a quarter of population, including Indonesia, USA, Brazil, Pakistan, the Russian Federation, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Japan and Mexico. 8 of these are considered less developed, leaving USA, Russian Federation and Japan. The demographers project that Earth's population will reach over 9 million by 2050, with virtually all growth occurring in the developing countries. As can be seen in this diagram, the blue region shows the more developed regions and the maroon area shows the developing countries, where most of the growth is projected to occur, since this area is successively becoming greater than the blue region. Table 4 gives an overall picture for developing nations in terms of their densities and how the distribution is changing between 1980 and 2013. Along with this, percentage of population in urban areas is also given. Percentage of population residing in less developed regions has increased between 1980 to 2013. Why to study population distribution? Now, there are 3 main questions to look into the significance of any population study. Firstly, how many people, which refers to the size of population in a region. Secondly, what kind of people, which refers to the composition of population, which comprises features of age structure, literacy rates, and lastly, how these people are distributed in an area, which is the present topic of interest. So, population distribution as a concept is very important to be analyzed, whether we study population distribution for developing or developed regions. The real wealth of a country is the people residing in that country, because it is these people who are using the resources and deciding the various policies. It is important to know how many women and men country has, how many children are born each year, how many people die and how, whether they sit in cities or villages, can they read or write and what work they do. This all information is very crucial for policy makers for designing suitable policies. Information regarding population distribution points towards the pressure on the resources of the country and on the services of that area. It also reflects the environmental implications of population growth in areas. It is evident that the influence of population on natural resources and socio-economic environment makes it very important to study the trends in population growth and distribution. It will be all the more important in planning and implementation of development programs in any country. The distribution of population is of particular interest to the planner, because by this he can take into account the changing needs of the people in different regions. For a politician, this information will help in determining the number of voters, type of voters and location of voters. Educationists will also need similar kind of information. The diagram shows implications for the population distribution. Developing nations have around 80% of population and are housed to only 20% of the resources, while developed nations have 80% of the resources with only 20% of the world population. Now we come up to the conclusion. As less developed regions cope with an increasing share of world population, pressure will intensify on the already dwindling resources within many regions. Redistribution of population through migration shifts the relative pressures exerted on local environments, perhaps easing the strain in some areas and increasing it in others. Both regions of high density and low density will require separate kind of policies. Finally, the trend towards urbanization poses a complex challenge to the environment. The rapid pace of urbanization often hinders the development of adequate infrastructure and regulatory mechanisms for coping with pollution and other byproducts of growth, often resulting into a number of ills. So, it is imperative to suggest here that population distribution will always be changing, and to adjust to these changes, it is important to design appropriate policies so that some areas may not be taking too much burden and others too less burden of population. Also, this problem will be multiplied if areas with too much burden have too less resources. That's all for today's lecture. Thank you.